Hi, I'm Paul Nelson, and I'm a postdoc at the Department of Computer Science at Aarhus University. And today I will talk to you about anonymization, friend or foe. And I want us to ask the question, is anonymization a dark pattern? And try to see if we can find out why or why not, and what it really means to anonymize data. So let's start off. And first off, I want to tell you a story. So once upon a time, I was riding on a train, sitting there, minding my own business, when suddenly the train conductor approaches me and says, "Hey, can you please answer this survey?" So out of nowhere, a survey appears, right? As might happen in your everyday life. And of course, also, they were telling me that your answers will be completely anonymous. And for me, being a privacy researcher, whenever someone says that word anonymous, I start thinking, what do they mean? What does that really mean? So I think we need to pause the story right there and pick apart this word, anonymization and the survey and what was going on, right? So first of all, we'll look at the survey and start thinking, what's happening here? So they want to ask me and collect my data about where I'm traveling, from where to where, why I'm traveling there, my travel frequency, and some demographics about me. And then, of course, the sort of meat of the survey, like which is actually, how I felt about the train experience. So was the train conductor being, professional and approachable? Were the bathrooms clean enough? And so on and so forth. Basically, the general sort of comfort of the journey. This is the meat of the survey. So that's what I wanted to do analytics on. And of course, I was promised that this is completely anonymous. This is also, again, what set me off into starting to think. And so they want to capture all this data, and they will keep it completely anonymous. But how? How will they do that? How will they keep it anonymous? So we need to actually go back a little bit in time, and I'll need to give you some background about anonymization, because we're often told that things will be anonymous or someone will anonymize our data. But what does that mean? What are they trying to tell us? First off, I want to give a sort of social perspective, where I would like to tell you what my thoughts on the social perspective of anonymization is. So I think that when someone tells us that data will be anonymous, they means that they will protect it, that they will keep us safe. I think this is the general understanding of the word anonymous. It means safe. So basically, I'm offering you anonymity. Now please let me collect your data because I'm keeping you safe. This, I think, is a social perspective. In this talk, we will be more focused on the technical perspective, because anonymization in practice, we need to do something, right? But how do we anonymize? I want us to start off by looking at examples from the past of how people have tried to anonymize data. So we'll start off in the US with some medical data. And this, in all case by now, this is from 1998, but it's old and still relevant, let's say. So this is sort of when privacy started to be something people started to care about, I would say, in data collection. So we had this medical data, which of course contains sensitive stuff like the medication someone got put on, the diagnosis that was given, and what sort of procedure that was carried out, alongside, of course, with very identifying information like the name, the address, and the social security number. And this is what's in Denmark, the CPR number. So something that by design is uniquely identifiable. So of course this data is sensitive, it's medical data connected to a specific person. It's very sensitive. And so they knew that this is very interesting information, yet it's something that we really need to protect. So can we be able to do some analysis on it if we perhaps anonymize it? So this was the thought process. They thought that, okay, we take this data and then we can use it maybe in research and we can release data sets that are anonymized. Let's do that. So how do they anonymize the data, you ask? Well, they did this thing. They just removed the name, they removed the address, and they removed the social security number. And then they said, hey, now I have anonymized the data and we will release it. So this might have been, well and good on its own, but in this case, there was also some background data. This is data from a different source. So this is actually what's known as a voter registration list, and you can buy them in the US. They cost you $20, and they contain all these things like the name, the address, the date someone registered to vote, the party affiliation, and the date last voted, as well as the zip code, the sex, and the birth date. And so on its own, this data might not be that interesting, but it turned out that in conjunction, together with that anonymized data, it was actually very interesting, because you could essentially put these two records together because they both contain the zip code, the sex, and the birth date. And then you could start actually what's known as re-identify. You could do re-identification on the records in the medical set. So on its own, this medical data was, anonymized, but together with other data, you could re-identify people. And it was even the case that the person that was in some sense responsible for releasing the data, the governor of Massachusetts at that point in time, he was also in the medical data set, and he was re-identified. So his medical data was leaked. And it's just a really bad thing when you try to protect data, but you fail, right? Because at this point, it's irrevocable. You have released the data. So this is really quite sad and worrying. And now we've seen medical data. Let's also look at some text data. And again, this is an old example, and these things keep happening. So I don't know if you guys remember, but before Google was popular, there was this thing called AOL, where you could use a search engine, and it was really popular. So they had 20 million searches that they thought, let's anonymize these and release them, and we can do this data analysis because that's really neat to be able to learn stuff. And let's look at a specific example of one search history that was released. So it was not connected to a name. In this case, it was just connected to a number, like an identifier, but not a name. And this person was searching for things like numb fingers and 60 single men. They were also searching for landscaper in this very sort of specific area in Lilburn, Georgia. They were also searching for different people with the last name Arnold. And then again, sort of location data here of homes sold in this specific part of Georgia. And so in this case, there were no, necessarily background data from some other data set. It was just the fact that the searches themselves contained so much information. You could sort of guess that this is probably a person that, has a connection to Lilburn, Georgia, and they know all these people called Arnold. And they might be in this range where they think 60 single men are interesting. So it turned out that, can you do re-identification? Yes, you can. Specifically, it was a journalist that wanted to see if they could re-identify. And they actually reached out to a person, and this person, it was Thelma Arnold. She was 62, living in Lilburn, Georgia. And she said, yes, these are my searches. So as a journalist, just able to piece together and figure that, this again was not anonymized properly. It was an attempt at anonymization, but it didn't work. So what I want to say here, right, is that technically anonymization is difficult. It has been difficult, and it continues to be difficult. It's just not easy to anonymize data because it can be rich and there can be background data. It's difficult. Another example that was made big headlines is when Netflix wanted to release anonymous data and to improve their ratings for, suggestions for what to view next. And they removed usernames, right? And said that, okay, look, this is now anonymized. But it turns out that there was background data. Again, if you took the Internet Movie Database, you could again do this join. And you might say, well, the Internet Movie Database was already public, right? So what could I potentially learn from Netflix? Well, the thing is, I know that Internet Movie Database is public, right? So I might score movies that I feel comfortable sharing. But on Netflix, I might be watching all of my guilty pleasures. But now when you can put them together, you can then also find out about all the embarrassing things I watch. So this was again failed attempt at anonymization. Lots of attention on this. Again, not good. And this sort of continues. There was even a paper that said, there is no silver bullet. The identification still doesn't work. This was in 2014. And these papers keep being, produced because it's still true that anonymization is difficult. And more recently, this paper from 22 here attacks on the identification's defenses. This actually received also the best paper award of Usenet security. And what they did show is that many of the popular anonymization techniques, such as k-anonymity and diversity and so on, they still don't work. They're able to break down. And it's very unfortunate, right? Because what we're hearing here, what the lesson is, that this arbitrary anonymization doesn't work. It's very difficult from a purely technical perspective. So I want to give you some sort of insight here on why is it difficult to anonymize. And if you can remember one thing from this talk today, I want it to be this next slide. So first of all, why do we collect data, right? It's probably because we want to learn something. Because if you don't want to learn something, we can actually have perfect anonymization or private privacy, if you will. We just don't release any data. But if you want to learn something from the data, then there is this there's this information theoretic premise that you need to attend to somehow. It's where there is learning, there must be leakage. Otherwise, you can't learn. If you want to learn something about the data, you need to leak something, right? Because otherwise, we know as much as we did before collecting the data, right? There needs to be somehow an information flow from the data you collect to your knowledge. Otherwise, there is no learning. And this is just information theory. We can change this. So the lesson we need instead is that when we want to anonymize something so that we can learn from it, we need to be intentional about the fact that we're going to be leaking something. And we can't just go oh, oops, I accidentally leaked this thing, right? We need to say, yes, you're going to be allowed to learn something because we want to leak data. The thing is that's really crucial is that it needs to be controlled. We need to control how much can be leaked from the data. That is to say that arbitrary anonymization won't work. We need to be very specific, very clear technically about what we are leaking. Okay, now that we have this background and we sort of understand that anonymization is difficult and why, we can get back to the story. So when they say completely anonymous, we're reacting, right? We're wondering what it means. And, maybe kind of doubting that it will be anonymous or sort of feeling a bit suspicious about this word. Because really, are they actually trying to help me and protect me because they have a good technique they're using? Or is it sort of a dark pattern where they're just saying anonymous to make me give them my data, right? How can I know? So first, I was looking at the survey that I got, right, and started thinking, are my answers there unique? Because in that case, it would probably be difficult to give me any sort of anonymity in this case. So let's look at what they asked again, right? So they asked about my train journey, right? And I could start filling it in. I know I was traveling from Gothenburg to Copenhagen. I was traveling for work. I wasn't traveling that often. Maybe this is unusual. And then I started thinking, hey, wait a minute. They're also asking for my age and my zip code. And I started thinking, if they know my age, know my zip code, the other people in my zip code, my neighbors, how many of them are, on the train here? How many of them travel with this train? How often do they travel? Will this survey be anonymous just based on who's writing today? Or is it collected for a month, many months, a year? I have no idea right at this point, right? So is it possible that my answers are very unique and therefore a little bit difficult to hide? Then I also remember I talked about background data before, right? Like, well, I bought this ticket in advance. This means that the train company, they have my ticket information, and they also paid with my credit card. So they have a billing address, and like, so they know where I live, they know my zip code, they know my starting point, the destination. So is it possible that they could do this re-identification thing? Do they have enough information? And it's possible. At this point, I don't have enough information to know, because I can't know everyone else that answered the survey, right? And I don't know how long it's running. So it's very difficult to properly assess whether re-identification is possible or not when we're put on the spot like this. And also, we even at this point, we might not know what background data is out there. We don't know what other people have collected, and we also don't know if people will collect more data in the future. So we're just really put in a really difficult situation if we try to assess the risk here. So I want us all to, like, when we are presented with surveys like this, to think that, should I answer or not? Like, you don't have to just give up your data, because bottom line, it is your data. You decide if you want to answer or if you don't want to answer. Maybe you think it's fine. Maybe you don't care that there's a risk of someone finding out your answers. Maybe you don't care for anonymity in this case. Or maybe you feel like, I need to give up some really sensitive information here, and I don't feel comfortable. In this case, don't answer. Don't answer the survey. You don't have to. It's your data, and you decide. So I want to sort of give you these takeaways from today, that when you happen to be in the situation in the future, what can you do to sort of make an informed decision? First of all, I would urge you to be curious, open-minded, and think, what will this data be for? Is it possible that, they have enough information to re-identify me? Do I need anonymization? Do I feel like I need anonymization in this case? Would I feel bad if someone found out my answers? And would I be willing to take that risk? So just be curious and think about the implications of releasing this kind of data. Also remember that just because someone says that it will be anonymous, doesn't necessarily mean that it's safe. It could be, but the word anonymous in itself, like, we really don't need, because we don't know if it's good enough, right? Because we have historically seen lots of times where anonymized data was actually not anonymous. So anonymous might not mean safe. So don't just say, oh, it's anonymous, I will answer, right? Because that might not be true. Also, ask questions. First, you can ask, how do you anonymize my data? And what, if you want to be technical, you can ask, what privacy guarantees do I get from this anonymization, right? Because remember the lesson from before, this leak, needs to be intentional and it needs to be controlled. They can't just do something arbitrary. So if you ask them, how do you anonymize my data, right? If they are not doing some arbitrary thing, they would know what to tell you. They will have an answer for you. And it's hopefully not just, we remove your name, unless you feel that is sufficient and you're willing to take the risk, of course. But I would say the big red flag, if you ask these questions and they either can't, or worse, won't answer, then you might want to be careful, because then they might just be using the word anonymous as a sort of dark pattern to make you give away your data. Because bottom line, it is your data. You decide if you want to give it away or not. So the next time someone asks for your data and they say it's anonymous, think about what I've said today, and hopefully some of these questions and tips will be useful. Thank you very much.